Rewind is a production of Wisconsin Eye. To keep programs like this free and accessible to all, please consider a charitable gift to wisi.org/donate or text WISI to 44321. This program is brought to you from the Margaret FARROW Studio.
Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.
This week on Rewind, your week in review. Supporters of abortion rights took to the halls of the state capitol to voice their anger over Republicans' refusal to repeal Wisconsin's abortion ban. Plus, incumbents in Wisconsin are in tight races, according to a new Marquette University Law School poll. And U.S. Senator Ron Johnson is in hot water after texts reveal his staffer wanted to deliver fake electoral votes for Trump just minutes before Congress was set to certify Joe Biden's victory on January 6. All this and more on Rewind, your week in review for June 24th.
Hi, I'm Emilee Fannon.
And I'm Mitchell Schmidt.
Mitch, thanks for joining us on this week of Rewind. We have a lot to get to, of course, with the big U.S. Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. But first, I sat down with Ben Wikler, who is the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, to talk a little bit about their big state convention happening this weekend. Let's first take a listen to that, and then we will recap everyone on this week's biggest stories. Ben, thank you so much for joining me to preview the Democratic State Convention that will be happening in La Crosse this weekend. I first just kind of want to get our viewers to learn a little bit how this will be different from the Republican State Convention. Of course, they have an endorsement process, but I'm sure there's going to be a little different themes and messaging that you guys will be projecting this weekend.
It's very different. And Emilee, it's great to be with you and all the WisPolitics viewers. The Republican Party convention was a showcase of extremism and division. We had a third of the Republican convention vote to decertify the 2020 election, which is a constitutional impossibility. And what you didn't hear was a vision for how to do the right thing for Wisconsinites. At the Democratic Party convention, it's a festival of unity around Governor Evers' message about doing the right thing for people. It's a celebration of progress, of paving enough roads to drive to Denver and back from Wisconsin, of getting our schools back in the top 10 in the country, of giving a 15% tax cut to middle-class Wisconsinites. And through all that, having record low unemployment and a tremendous budget surplus, it's a strategy that's worked. It starts with common sense. And Democrats, to a person, are united around making sure we reelect Governor Evers, that we protect our democracy, and that we end Ron Johnson's political career.
Now, of course, the Republican State Convention, they typically do endorse a candidate, even though some just didn't reach that threshold. But I guess what is the strategy behind Democrats not endorsing candidates ahead of the primary?
So the Democratic Party of Wisconsin's strategy of not having a party endorsement actually goes back to the kind of reforming of the party in the 1940s. And it drew on the traditions of the Progressive Party. The idea was that it should be voters, not party bosses or insiders, who decide who their nominees should be. And because of that, we entrust to voters the decisions about who should represent the party in the general election, and we trust our voters to make a great decision. I think we have a tremendous slate of candidates, for example, in the Senate race. Whoever the nominee is will get the full-throated support of the Democratic Party in the general election. And what we've been focused on is laying the groundwork, both communicating about Ron Johnson's disastrous, self-serving career in politics, but also doing the organizing in every part of Wisconsin, in rural and suburban and urban areas alike, across lines of race and ethnicity, gender and geography, to make sure that once we have a nominee, it's like they're climbing into the cockpit of a rocket ship and hitting blast off.
All right. And during the pandemic, of course, everyone had to adjust, right? You still had to fundraise, but the Democratic Party kind of got creative. You guys had a lot of virtual events. You had some celebrities that hosted some virtual events. And of course, as things got better, you've, of course, expanded to in-person events. But I guess, how have you really expanded your tools this year specifically? What's new?
So we used to, before the pandemic, just focus on knocking on as many doors as possible. It's still our bread and butter. It's a very powerful tactic with neighborhood teams all over the state and with our great county parties. During the COVID pandemic, we went fully virtual, and we learned how to do virtual organizing with virtual phone banks and folks, hopping on Zoom to get on the phone. Now we have both of those things plus a huge focus on what's called relational organizing, where we use technology to basically supercharge the oldest tactic in politics, which is talking to your friends and your neighbors and your relatives. We now encourage all of our activists and volunteers to load up an app and reach out to the folks that they know to make sure that they request absentee ballots, that they make a plan to vote, that they recruit their friends and family to vote. And through all three of those tactics, we call it our trident, the in-person door knocking, the virtual organizing, and the relational organizing, we're going to really seek to spike Democratic turnout in this midterm election. We know that this is a tough year, but we think we have both the candidates and the organizing strategy that can make the difference.
What do you think are the biggest issues facing voters right now? What are you hearing? You know, you're probably not the one exactly going to do the door knocking, but what are volunteers hearing as some reoccurring themes?
So we know everyone is struggling with rising costs. And the key question in this election is who is fighting to bring those costs down? Who is actually doing the right thing to serve people? And that's where you see Governor Evers proposing to take that surplus and send out checks to people so that they can help pay for gas. We see President Biden looking at a gas tax holiday. We see Democrats in Congress proposing a bill to crack down on oil company price gouging, which every Republican voted against. These are the kinds of fights that can actually reduce the costs on people. At a moment when wages are rising, when unemployment is low, we want to make sure that people can afford the things that they need to live and to thrive. And that's what Democrats are focused on. Republicans seem just to be obsessed with rigging the rules so that they can overturn the election results in 2024. It's not actually about what's happening in voters' lives. And that's a real contrast between what you see from Democrats and from Republican politicians at this moment.
Now, of course, Republicans are supposed to have an edge this year because historically, when we have a Democratic president and Democrats who have control over Congress, it's a little bit more challenging sometimes, just historically, for Democrats to fight into midterms. I guess, how do you overcome President Biden's extremely low approval numbers, while, Governor Evers is still remaining steady in the new latest Marquette University Law School poll? But how do you, overcome those challenges when it comes to a president who is not doing so hot when it comes to the polls?
There are national dynamics that are absolutely there. Wisconsin is really a state that is focused on Wisconsin. And you can see that in how different political figures are polling. Governor Evers, I think, is the most popular politician in the state of Wisconsin, in part because in many ways he's not a politician. He is a former science teacher and school principal and school superintendent of public instruction. His mantra is what's best for our kids is what's best for our state. It seems like the GOP's mantra is what's best for the most extreme fringes of the Republican Party is what's best for the Republican politicians. And that contrast is something that people can see and they can experience in their own lives with what the state government does. So for us, it's about grounding our work in what actually makes people's lives better, in doing the right thing for folks, instead of just thinking about how to play political games or manufacture issues to run on. That, I think, is the core to this moment. And in every year, even in tough midterm years, on both sides, there are some states that stand out where they buck a national trend. Wisconsin's on track to be that, both in the governor's race, in the attorney general's race with Josh Kaul, down ballot, and with Ron Johnson, who is spectacularly unpopular in a moment when you'd think he'd be able to capitalize on all the things he's trying to talk about in his ads. But people can see that what he does with his power is give himself and his biggest donors a big tax cut, use taxpayer dollars to fly himself back from his vacation home in Florida to Washington, D.C., and then, even though he knows that Joe Biden won the election, try to benefit himself politically by siding with Trump's attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. None of that flies with most Wisconsin voters. And that's why I think we have I think we're going to win the governor's race, the Senate race, and do well down ballot this year.
I do also want to ask, do you expect a visit from President Biden in the coming weeks as we inch closer to the August primary?
I certainly hope so. President Biden, when he actually comes to the state and speaks to people, they hear about what he's doing, how he's fighting for them and showing up. And every time he does that, it helps the numbers rise. People hearing directly from the president is our most effective tool, our most effective tactic to make sure people see that Democrats are fighting for them. When people get their news about Democrats from Republicans, that's when Democrats are in trouble. And so I think it's critical to hear directly from President Biden, to hear from Democrats. Every time we hear from Senator Baldwin, people get more excited about what Democrats are fighting to do, including with the Women's Reproductive Health Act, which she is such a tremendous advocate for. If we had just one more vote in the U.S. Senate, we could potentially protect Roe and the right for families and their doctors to make their most personal and intimate healthcare decisions in a moment when Republicans want to tear those freedoms apart. And these issues are so personal for people, and hearing directly from Democratic candidates and office holders is the best way to get the message out.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for your time. Wisconsin Eye and WisPolitics will have everyone covered at this weekend's convention. Thanks so much. All right, Mitch, now let's dive into the biggest story that just landed today that I started off the show with, of course, that the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe now leaves it up to states to decide when it comes to abortion rights. And what that basically means is that an 1849 abortion ban here in Wisconsin immediately goes into effect that would prohibit the procedure from ever happening and healthcare providers from performing the procedure only unless a mother's life is at risk. Now, of course, Republicans are celebrating this decision, praising it. Meanwhile, Democrats, including Governor Tony Evers, are calling this really a devastating loss for women here in Wisconsin. All of this comes on the same week when lawmakers gathered, I should say some lawmakers came here, and that was when Governor Evers called a special session, really requesting lawmakers to take action to repeal that 1849 abortion ban. But Republicans, as we know is history at the state capitol, they have rejected nearly every single special session the governor has called for. So without any action, this basically means this is the law of the land. So leaving women kind of in limbo, not able to get this procedure. First, I want to toss to our video from earlier this week from Senate Minority Leader Janet Bewley, who basically kind of set the stage of what it's going to be like for women here in Wisconsin. And this was in reaction to Republicans gaveling in and out of that special session. Let's take a listen.
In March, while knowing that a majority of Wisconsinites support legal access to abortion, Republicans adjourned the regular legislative session without giving legislation any consideration or debate. Today, we must protect the rights of all Wisconsinites to make their own health care decisions without interference from politicians by repealing our state's archaic criminal abortion law. While abortion remains safe and legal in Wisconsin today, a decision from the Supreme Court is imminent, and time is of the essence to protect the care and services our family members, friends, and our neighbors need and deserve. We must make clear in the days and weeks ahead, there is no doubt where the people of Wisconsin are on this issue.
Republicans called that special session a political stunt, basically as a political move for Evers to win political points, win the headlines that Republicans rejected this. But I think now that that's over with, I think there's a lot of lingering questions on possible litigation that could be following after today's decision. We know that the Attorney General has kind of insisted that there's possibly this 1849 law might not be upheld, Mitch. We've also heard from some Republicans, Senator Ron Johnson, who doesn't think it will stand. So I guess, have you heard from the Attorney General yet today? And what do you think, I guess, could maybe come out of this with legal challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big question is, what's going to happen next? And I think all signs point to that, heading towards the state Supreme Court. Obviously, that has a Republican lean, though Justice Brian Hagedorn he's flipped on matters in the past. I think the Attorney General Call, he's said he's not going to be enforcing any sort of a ban. That being said, a lot of these matters are likely going to be coming in to district attorneys at the county level. So it's hard to really say what the next step is going to be. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's likely going to be heading to the state Supreme Court. Big question there is whether or not that's going to happen this year, early next year. It could be today. There's the April election. Justice Patience Roggensack is not seeking re-election. She's one of the 4 conservative-backed judges. So if a liberal-backed judge can, secure that seat, I mean, it's going to flip the dynamic, and that, could drastically change what we may see here.
Right, and I think there's also a lot of lingering questions. What will even happen this year in this election? What will happen this fall? Will Governor Evers stay in power? Will Attorney General Josh Call still be the Attorney General? We've heard from many Republican candidates who are seeking to unseat Governor Tony Evers. Many of them said they want to keep that 1849 abortion ban in place. I also spoke to Rebecca Clayfish this week in a one-on-one interview, and I asked her, well, a lot of people are questioning now, what about contraception? What about birth control? What about Plan B? What are going to happen to those rights? Are those going to be next on the docket to be possibly overturned, or leaving it up to the states to decide? Clayfish says she doesn't want to ban birth control or anything like that, but kind of another question that we don't know how the other candidates feel about this, but it kind of just remains to be seen what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think all the gubernatorial candidates challenging Evers are all pretty much in step on that topic. We've heard from Speaker Voss. He said he supports exceptions for rape or incest. That being said, we saw what happened with the special session. That was a little different, but whether or not the legislature takes up something like that, it's hard to say. It doesn't seem like the full Republican caucus would necessarily be in line with Speaker Voss on that, and then you had the Senate to that equation as well.
It's quite a mixed bag on their views on abortion, because we've seen a lot of extreme proposals, very anti-abortion bills in the state legislature. So maybe see those reignited. Not sure if it's even more restrictive or less restrictive. Kind of remains to be seen. But let's get to the highlights of the Marquette University Law School poll. I think one of the key takeaways is that Tim Michels in the race for governor has a slight edge over Rebecca Clayfish. Now, Michels is at 27%, Clayfish 26%, Nicholson 10%, Rantham 3%. Also got to really point out that there's 32% that still don't know. Also important to note, Mitch, that Michels' lead over Clayfish is within the margin of error, plus or minus 4.3%. But, this could maybe mean a little jump from that Trump endorsement that Michels secured. A lot of people thought Clayfish was going to get that. Do you think maybe that's maybe helped him out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a factor that can't be ignored. Trump holds a lot of sway over Republicans, not just in Wisconsin, but nationwide. He secured that. He obviously entered the race in late April. So this is the first poll that we've really gotten a sense of his level of support. And, as you mentioned, the margin of error there, 27 to 26, you can call that neck and neck.
Right.
But really, I think it really kind of solidifies that in terms of the primary, at least at this point, it is a Tim Michels, Rebecca Clayfish race. Unless there's going to be some major shifts, I don't have a crystal ball, so it's really hard to say.
Right.
But I think one thing that was kind of interesting in, I guess you could call it the Michels' jump, I mean, his first polling, being up there with Rebecca, was that Rebecca didn't really drop that much from the April polling that she was in. I think she was around like 32, and now she's at 26. Talking with the Marquette poll director, Charles Franklin, it really seems like Michels' gain came the most from those undecided voters, which I think as of the most recent poll, it's about 32% are undecided.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's, that's a drop from April. So it seemed like maybe those were kind of waiting. We had heard the murmurs of Michels for a little while there, or other names that were thrown out there. So I think that, it'll be interesting to see when we get to August kind of who ekes out that win.
Right, and you can't ignore the fact that Rebecca Clayfish also was the candidate that came closest during their state party convention to reaching that threshold of almost securing the party's endorsement. I believe she was 57, 56, around that range, and Michels wasn't really within that either. But of course, we understood that there was the big push to not endorse, so that took away some votes. She's been on the campaign trail the longest. We'll see if she can just keep carrying that momentum to the August primary. Governor Evers is sitting back pretty cozy, kind of just basically waiting to see who he's going to be going up against this fall.
Right.
Moving on to Governor Tony Evers, he did fairly well in most of the matchups against all of the the Republicans in the primary race for governor. As you can see, Evers has an edge of all four. I think you got to give him some credit here in the fact that President Biden's poll numbers are not doing well right now. He's getting a lot of flack for inflation, these gas prices, trying to find solutions to really just ease the burden of what a lot of people are feeling right now. But it doesn't seem that maybe that might not be a big factor for Governor Evers. It remains to be seen. We have a long way to go until November. And also, what happened today with abortion rights here in Wisconsin, that could also be a big factor here in the primary race as well. Right,
yeah. I mean, usually you hear that voters have very short memories. August is not far away. So and we've already seen everybody kind of weighing in on Roe v. Wade being overturned, and we were hearing about it even before when the decision was leaked. So yeah, I imagine that is very likely going to be taking center stage in the primary.
And it's always important to note that will that still be a big issue on voters' minds come November? I think it's fair to say it will be fresh when it comes for this August primary, but remains to be seen come this fall. Also, let's just quickly recap the Democratic primary in the U.S. Senate race. Barnes is once again leading. He's maintaining his lead. I think the only really shift we saw there, Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Lasry kind of tightened his percentage on Barnes. He's at 21%, Godlewski at 9%, and Tom Nelson at 7%. Once again, really have to point out, still 36% don't know who they want to support because there's a lot of faces. There's a lot of people running in that race, and the margin of error is still the same, plus or minus 3.3%. So really just kind of a numbers game here right now.
Right, yeah. And I think as we had mentioned, if I'm getting ahead of you, I apologize. The matchup with Johnson, obviously they're all running to unseat Senator Ron Johnson. Every one of those four candidates, at least those within the polling, were relatively close in terms of Johnson. So it'll be interesting to see, whoever kind of gets through the primary and ultimately faces Johnson in November. Obviously the undecideds will fade away a little bit, obviously. So then we will, see how they kind of pair up.
Yeah, and this is our last MU poll, according to Charles Franklin, until the primary. Yep. So we'll probably see a lot more of these numbers in a lot of our articles over the next few weeks. But it's kind of just a good first glance as we head to August 9th. Speaking of U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, he is facing a lot of criticism because his name was dropped during the January 6th hearings this week. Now, this is in specifically talking about those fake electoral votes that Wisconsin Republicans did create. And this has been a really big hot topic this week. I'm going to have to recap this as best as possible, so everyone stay with me. So at first, what was revealed in the House Select Committee is that an aide for U.S. Senator Ron Johnson wanted to hand-deliver fake electoral votes for Wisconsin to a staffer for former Vice President Mike Pence. And that's according to text messages that were revealed in this January 6th committee. Now, this all became relevant or revealed, and these text messages happened minutes before Congress was set to begin certifying Joe Biden's victory on January 6th. And an aide basically sent these text messages. A Pence staffer basically said, hey, do not give those documents to him. We don't want them. But, this kind of gives us some insight into Senator Ron Johnson's involvement in these fake electoral votes. Of course, his spokesperson earlier this week downplayed the incident. Johnson denied having any involvement. He did speak out about his involvement later, which we'll get to. But I first just want to listen to his take, which is earlier in the week on Tuesday. This is from CNN, catching Ron Johnson basically denying he had any involvement. Let's take a listen.
One of our staff members went over. We got contacted by somebody, okay, I don't know who. We've got this envelope for the vice president. Can Senator Johnson deliver it? Because I'm obviously on the Senate floor. If this were a real committee, they'd be asking, why wasn't the Capitol secured? Who was in charge of that security? This is a total partisan witch hunt, and I was not involved in this at all.
So, Mitch, that video was from earlier in the week. Yesterday, Ron Johnson went on conservative radio host talk show Vicki McKenna, basically saying that the fake electoral slates came from a different office, a representative, Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania. Now, a spokesperson from Kelly's office completely denied that Johnson's claim was completely false. So really just a lot of lingering questions that people are wondering about. Johnson saying one thing, these texts are revealing another thing. And, you know, who was this staff intern remains to be seen. Who had the copies of this? And why did Johnson not vet this? You know, I've talked to other former chief of staffs. They were Democrats, but they say they usually always go through their boss, you know, a senator, a congressman, before they do this type of paperwork exchange. And it's just a little unusual that Johnson didn't have, or it seems like he wasn't really aware of this was going on. Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of summed it up. There are questions. Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I think also, do you think politically can he overcome this? I mean, he's been in the headlines for the COVID information, his comments about January 6th, vaccinations. Now, once again, he's making headlines on the January 6th and his involvement with these fake electoral votes. You know, come November, will it still be fresh in people's minds? But do you think he can overcome this politically?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's easy to view Wisconsin as a 50-50 state, and it's just going to be a numbers game every time. I think that it would be inaccurate to say that all Republicans want to look away from the January 6th in the Select Committee. So there are people out there, you know, Republican voters who are interested in this. Whether that pans out in the polls, to be determined, I suppose. Johnson is a strong candidate. I mean, he has fared better than Trump in the state. So, I mean, I don't know how much of it really comes down to who he's matched against, and how much, you know, how many of those Republican voters will view this as an issue that's going to make them change their mind. Right. It's hard to get into that mind. And you can't ignore the fact, too, this is supposed to be a good year for Republicans, especially, you know, historically when Democrats are in control of the White House and in Congress. They don't perform as well. That's just what the statistics show us. Don't have a crystal ball. Anything can happen. It is a big midterm year. So, but he's a popular guy. I mean, you leave outside Madison, Milwaukee, a lot of people still support him and still back him. And it really just depends if these fake electoral votes really be hanging over his head heading into the fall. Yeah. Last topic that we want to get to is Michael Gableman was in court again this week, and want to set it clear that it was for a different open records lawsuit filed by American Oversight. Of course, we recapped our viewers here on the show that there's 3 pending lawsuits by American Oversight about seeking records related to the probe. This one, basically we got a little bit of insight of what Michael Gableman was doing the first 2 months after he was hired. He was hired last year and around this time, and he basically testified saying that he was still getting a grasp on how elections work, and he didn't really do a lot of investigating the first 2 months. But us as taxpayers were still paying him $11,000 a month. So during July and August, taxpayers paid over $22,000 while Gableman was still searching for office furniture, looking for an office, going to a public library that we revealed that he didn't have a computer. He was using the New Berlin Library, which is an area in Waukesha near Brookfield as well. So, you know, we didn't learn a lot more about why he deleted these records. He admitted to deleting these records, but I think also we want to say, you know, Mitch, you were in court. It was a lot different behavior and tone that we saw from Gableman yesterday in court compared to a few weeks ago. Yeah, I think that would be safe to say. Earlier this month, as you mentioned, it was a different case. That one specifically for a contempt charge against Gableman's office. This one earlier this week was for Speaker Voss's office. Speaker Voss hired Gableman. I don't know how much we need to get into the weeds on the specifics there, but yeah, the previous court appearance, it was, as was reported, he accused Judge Frank Remington of being a partisan advocate, refused to answer any questions. After the hearing, he was, talking to the press and kind of, going through some of his grievances, I suppose, of how things went. And we had seen, you saw on the hot mic, there was criticism of American Oversight's attorney. jump to earlier this week, and it was answering the questions, kind of going through that. In terms of how much substance was there, information was gleaned from that, I think the Dane County judge kind of summed it up that there appears that documents were deleted, but what those entail doesn't seem like there would have been much, considering the amount of work or the level of work that he said that he was doing at the time.
Yeah, and like we mentioned too, that basically this was a different hearing where Gableman was testifying as a witness on Thursday, whereas a few weeks ago he was compelled to testify. He was subpoenaed, so he was kind of like a defendant. So that's kind of where his anger and outburst happened a few weeks ago. Let's just take a listen from court a little bit about Gableman and the judge in this decision.
It's my understanding, at least from what you testified, that you had no previous knowledge of election machines, and so you were getting up to speed on all of that?
I did not have a very sophisticated or intricate understanding, so yes, that is true. I went out there because I thought there was going to be some solid evidence of Chinese interference with the machines, and I was very disappointed by the lack of substance to back up those claims, and I was annoyed that I had gone out, especially as it turned out I had COVID. So anyway, I didn't find anything that I could use during that seminar.
What I have heard today is whatever work that was done was minimal, that the taxpayers were paying $11,000 a month to do. I will find that the purge contempts have been met. That doesn't explain why documents were destroyed, doesn't explain why documents weren't produced.
So on July 28th is the next hearing for this case, because like I said, there's three. The judge will decide whether the boss will face any additional penalties. Basically, she kind of wiped away the purge fines in this case. So that will come another day. Of course, we know there's a lot of other lawsuits with American oversight that have been stretched out for a very long time now. So we'll just kind of have to keep an eye on what happens next. Well, that will do it this week for Rewind. Mitch, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Emilee Fannon.
I'm Mitchell Schmidt.
We'll see you next week.
This program was brought to you from the Margaret FARROW Studio.
Rewind, Your Week in Review, is sponsored by the Wisconsin Realtors Association, bringing Wisconsin communities to life with great homes, businesses, and neighborhoods. The Wisconsin Realtors Association, the voice of real estate.